Welcome friends to episode 5 of our Rome 2 Divide Et Impera recaps. If you've just found these, then you need to go back to episode number 1 to get caught up properly. If you wish to watch them live, then they're streamed on my Twitch channel on Mondays starting at 2000 BST, with the link being in the description. We found ourselves starting off with relative stability. We were in no major wars and found ourselves now fielding 5 full stack armies spread over our vast kingdom. Our economy was growing, and for the first time ever we had gone multiple successive years with no food shortages, meaning our prominent families were not having to step up to the mark with donations. Pergamon was an ever-growing threat in the north. They now sprawled along our entire northern border with satrapies and allies included. We were currently on good terms, however their considerable expansion was noted. To the east, our satrapies remained loyal. A string of constant wars with a number of them involving us intervening on their behalf had kept them loyal thus far, but with Antiochus I ageing, well, his successor proved to be as able a statesman. We had allocated forces to the Arabian Peninsula in the hope of attacking them on all fronts and thus overwhelming them. The council had demanded it, and we were doing our utmost to carry out their request. However, the desert was ensuring progress was slow and attrition and supply problems were ever present. Across the Red Sea, we also had Madawi on our border, with an army from each side finding themselves camped just across the hills from one another. Tensions were high, and they were not to be trusted. They had been making attempts to take Aegyptus when we arrived on the scene. We felt their eyes were still fixed upon the prize. With our forces in position, we decided to attempt to abuse the Arabians' intricate defensive pact. We attacked one of their lesser neighbours, meaning that they could not call their allies in from further afield. With this declaration of war, we wasted no time and immediately moved to siege Yathrib. There was no time to waste as numerous hordes of enemy units roamed the deserts. Unfortunately for us, the enemy decided to sally out from their defensive position from within the town and fight us out in the open. Although we did hold a superior defensive position, the enemy were lying in wait and could stall for time. There was no urgency on their behalf, so we decided to advance towards them and use their own traps that had been set to our advantage. With us being heavily outnumbered, our cavalry would be kept busy and our elephants would not be kept in reserve. We would be deploying them immediately and combining them with our cavalry, hoping to employ morale-shocking hit and run tactics. As the lines closed, we clocked a number of their archers out in front of their formation, hoping to engage in some skirmishing. An opportunity that could not be missed, so we decided to commit our cavalry and our elephants to a charge, routing the enemy with devastating effect. With a small success starting us off on the correct foot, the sound of metal echoed through the desert as the massive bodies intertwined. With our elephants being committed from the offset, we saw immediate results. The enemy's right flank was crumbling, however our left flank was suffering due to the lack of cavalry support. With the enemy's right breaking, we threw our elephants into the centre of the battle, hoping to strike fear into their plebs that they called infantry. This was the catalyst we needed for victory. The enemy may have outnumbered us considerably, but they were badly armed peasants with no real military training. Their centre was broken. Our elephants then managed to trample the enemy's commander. With this acting as the final nail in the coffin, the enemy's desire to fight was gone, and they fled from the field. What cavalry we had was sent to run down as many of them as possible. However, we had scored our first victory in the war for the Arabian Peninsula. With our recent conquerors celebrating to the east, a surprise attack by Kinda saw them assault Hegra. We had little there in the way of defence other than a local garrison, the governor and some mercenaries. It was decided that if they were going to take the town, we would make them pay. Traps were placed and we did our utmost to bottleneck the streets. Our commander, Sophocles, a distant member of the Seleucid ruling dynasty, had decided that our family would be represented today, and if he must give up his life for the kingdom, he would. While the enemy approached the traps, we set them ablaze, and our infantry attempted to hold the front line where our cavalry and locals flanked. Sadly, however, it was not enough to break the enemy. We did manage to cause some of their units to rout, and did in fact damage a number of their units, and at one point even gave their commander a scare. But, in the end, it didn't matter. We just did not have the manpower to hold the defence, and eventually our garrison succumbed to the enemy onslaught. We had went from the high of a new settlement immediately to losing one of our defensive bastions in the desert. With mixed results in the west, it was decided that a combined land and sea assault was what would be orchestrated for our attack on Hagar, which was our enemy's capital. They had a small garrison here as well as a naval force, so unlike our other engagements, we wouldn't be able to just simply sail into the harbour. With our firepot ships taking point, we aimed to destroy the city's navy before turning on the enemy's forces. See if our firepots do the job here. They are sinking. The navy's attention then turned towards the coastline as the sizable enemy fleet sailed towards us. The overall outcome of this battle could hinge on the winner of this naval engagement. With the two fleets moving towards one another in line formation, this battle would more or less be decided by who managed to ram the other first. So cool.
Show them steel! One of our units has used all its ammunition.
Wow, we've literally scalped their arse. With the naval engagement falling in our favour, the ship's job was over, however the crew's was not. They made way for the enemy harbour and were tasked with capturing the enemy's outlying tower and then marching as fast as possible to the town square. Meanwhile, this entire time, the assault on the walls had been ongoing. Our skirmishers had been putting down damage and aiming to distract the enemies on the walls while our ladders had approached. Unfortunately, one of our ladders was caught short and set alight, meaning we only had one set of ladders to assault the enemy's walls. With the battle on and for the walls raging, our marines cautiously approached the city, easily capturing the enemy's tower and then making their way towards the city centre, which turned out to be defended by one of the enemy's professional units. The rest of our marine contingent then engaged the enemies behind the ramparts in an attempt to draw some of the defenders away from the desperate melee atop the walls. So far, everything was working out. Ironically, we were fielding 7 cavalry units, something that would normally be a delight. However, this was a siege battle. Those cavalry and our 4 pike units were not well suited for the type of combat raging on here. While the enemy's single units somehow continued to hold the square, our Seleucian levies positioned themselves on the wall and rained down death from above to devastating effect. With the path clear, we moved to reinforce our marines, but the enemy camel riders appeared, meaning we would have to chop our way through. Our archers outside the walls continued to rain in their fiery barrage until they ran out of ammo. They had kept the walls busy and bought our lads atop them time to work their way along. With daytime drawing to a close, our commander's patience was lost. The enemy still held the square, and the battle raged on all over the city. It was decided to send the pikes and cavalry in. We were getting desperate. They initially set fire to the gate, and then managed to push their way in. The enemy's infantry that had so gallantly defended the gates and the walls were now surrounded. It was only a matter of time before night would be here, and with daylight running away, our cavalry was sent to capture the square. This was certainly not conventional warfare, but in the end, as the sun faded from the battlefield, Hegra was in Seleucid hands. A devastating blow had been dealt to our Arabian enemies within a single season. Despite heavy casualties, we had secured the settlement, and with this victory at our back, it was decided by the council that our army on the border with Medewi should be reassigned to the Arabian town of Charmutas. We had a navy in the area and a competent general who claimed he could seize the town for us. We allowed command to be delegated to him, and our trust was well placed. The town was now in our hands, with only minimal casualties. With significant conquest comes significant expenditure. We had managed to secure numerous new settlements including the capital of Hagar. However, large sums of money had to be spent upgrading the infrastructure and changing the buildings over to our culture, as well as converting the locals away from their barbarian religion to a more Hellenistic following. With these upgrades taking place, we also replenished and combined our forces near Hagra, hoping to use it as a staging point for further incursions south. While preparations were being made, a delegate representing our satrapies appeared once again. They were requesting our help in a defensive war against Parthia. The council debated this decision, but Antiochus had already made up his mind. A constant state of minor wars was what had been keeping the satrapies loyal, and he would continue this state of affairs for as long as possible. We believe that Mascat, another Arabian faction who were in our headlights, had spies within our kingdom, and had heard rumblings of what was possibly to come as they ended our non-aggression pact. In the grand scheme of things, probably doing us a favour, as this could be seen as an act of aggression. On this note, we decided to conduct some diplomacy of our own, in the form of ending our military access with Pergamon. They had been constantly roaming our new province in the north and using it as a shortcut for their armies who were constantly expanding. The council decided that we should stop this free movement and perhaps prepare for what was to come. A reading of this situation was apt, as immediately after this decision they attempted to renegotiate the military access. Of course, we denied. Next up, we aimed for revenge at Hegra. We had lost it in a cross-border dash against Kinda. We had surrounded the settlement and destroyed some of their outlying patrols. But the time for our main assault was on. We decided to attack on two fronts, with our pikes and spearmen each taking a choke point. If we won this, Kinda was no more. Sensing a closing net, the enemies attempted to sally out and stop our thick wall of spears and pikes from bottlenecking the streets. However, we got there first and we pinned them in. Our pikes acted as a brick wall while our skirmishers rained death in from above. Our cavalry was sent around the western approach of the town with the hopes of harassing the enemy's flank. And with our cavalry constantly hitting and running, it did not take long for the pike's flank to collapse. With the enemies surrounded and no real route of escape, it was no time at all before the city was back in Seleucid hands. Luckily, the enemy had not damaged too much of the infrastructure in the short time they'd held the city, and with Kinda destroyed, our conquest of the Arabian Peninsula entered its endgame. However, the Guerilla, now largely landless, had one last card up their sleeve. They attempted to ambush one of our strategically placed armies which were put in place trying to block an easy march into our core provinces. We did attempt to retreat this army into the desert and were unfortunately caught out by one of the enemy's armies. The battlefield was set. We were the defenders here and we deployed in depth. Our weakness here was our lack of skirmishers, something the Arabians regularly fielded large volumes of. We were also limited with cavalry and our only real strength was our infantry. While the lines began clashing, we sent a large contingent of our Seleucian levies out to our left flank, where they were ordered to pivot around the enemy and cause them to face us on a wider front, while also hopefully bunching up their skirmishers, making our cavalry and elephants' job easier. Our hoplites and pikes combined into one long wall of points, the flanks covered by our levy units. Once we had managed to commit the majority of the enemy's infantry, the levies charged along with our cavalry and elephants. We were attempting to loop around and enclose the enemy's forces, hammer and anvil being deployed once again. With this folding manoeuvre being executed perfectly, the enemy's morale began flaking instantly. Their ragtag bunch of warriors that had been thrown together, no match whatsoever for the veterans of the Aegyptus campaign, and now the conquerors of Hegra. Lessons were being learned though. If one thing was becoming clear, we needed more cavalry in these armies to properly wage a prolonged war against the Arabs. Victory here was not total, however. The enemy still had another full stack within a few days' march, who as quickly as we had eyes on them, had disappeared back into the desert. We were also encountering supply issues. Attrition and desertion were rife, as the conditions were inhumane at best. But that's it for episode 5. A lot has happened, and at the exact same time, little has happened. We have made territorial gains down in Arabia, however the war still rages on. We have solidified our border, and next time we'll look to take over the entirety of the lands down here. The council have also suggested that Medewi cannot be trusted, and the entirety of Ethiopia would be much safer under our rule. With this in mind, we also have problems to the north. Pergamon are ever expanding and bring with them their satrapies and allies. Pirates have also sadly appeared once again off the coast of Side, ironically calling themselves the Peace of Rona. Thank you to everyone for the continued support on these episodes. They do take a lot of time to edit and put together. I am going to be evaluating their audience and support at the end of this playthrough to see if it's something I wish to continue doing. So I guess it's a case of use it or lose it. We will be back Monday coming at 2000 BST for the next rendition, where we will be looking to unite the Arabian Peninsula and kick off the festivities to the north. Thanks again, and we will catch you on the next one.